Hey everyone, it's Helen from S&B Deal Hunter. Today we have Justin Willess with us, a former mechanical engineer who back in 2022 acquired a construction business. Um, Very excited to hear Justin's story. Justin, it's great to have you on today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Helen.
Justin, tell us about your background and how you got into the acquisition space.
Traditionally educated as an engineer, mechanical engineer, and took the corporate route initially out of school, like most of us do. And the small business that I initially started working for was acquired by a larger corporate entity, and it became a very stereotypically corporate, bureaucratic environment, which really didn't suit what I was looking for. Uh, Growth has always been something I've itched for, and even at that age, the corporate bureaucracy wasn't going to let me flourish at that point in time. So I started consulting at a pretty early age, working for a lot of the same customers and clients that I had met with that small company. Did that for a couple decades, which was great. Learned a lot of different industries, a lot of different locations, a lot of travel, which I loved as a single guy. Um, in my 40s, I kind of got to a point in my career where there wasn't a lot of growth opportunity left in that consulting space. I was giving people recommendations on what to do, and oftentimes they wouldn't necessarily heed that advice. So I felt like I was wasting my time a lot with the people and the customers that I was working with. I was really looking for an opportunity to have more impact, more influence on what projects I worked on, how they were managed, and just as importantly, the people that I worked on with those projects. So in late 2021, I was very fortunate to have a dinner with a friend of a friend who introduced me to the SBA. And so this whole new world opened up for me. There's a mechanism out there by which we can get lending to go out and purchase a business. So I dove in pretty deep, learned everything I could. And once I figured out what the big pieces were to a potential acquisition, I realized pretty quickly I was going to need some money to actually inject into this acquisition. So we had accumulated a decent nest egg in a 401k. That was a majority of our equity. And eventually figured out there's this thing called ROBS, which is a rollover business startup, where I was allowed to transfer those 401k funds into a new vehicle in order to acquire through lending a larger business. So that's what we did in 2022. We closed on a construction business June 2022.
Got it. What made you decide to go down sort of the construction business path? Like what deals were you looking at? I know you said that, once you figured decided you were to buy a business, you closed on a deal pretty quickly. So what kind of deals were you looking at? What was your buy box like?
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we looked at a variety of things. We had a predominantly geographically constrained search. We liked where we lived. We didn't want to move. Again, we had kind of moved around a fair amount over the preceding 10 years or so. So small daughter, everything was kind of static. We wanted to keep that stuff steady. So that coupled with obviously a budget, what we could get SBA lending wise, I was looking to maximize the $5 million cap. And I was looking for something that complemented my skill set and experience. So construction fit that bill. It's hands-on. It's something I can touch and feel. I've done some construction management in the past. So all those things kind of lined up pretty well. And then we found a business that also checked all those boxes relatively quickly in the search. So those stars all aligned pretty quickly for us. And then we started down the LOI and the diligence phase, and closed in about 5 or 6 months.
Got it. Wow, that's very fast. How was the offer structured? How did you structure the LOI, I guess? And um, what did you kind of focus on during diligence and how did you conduct diligence?
Yeah, so the deal was already somewhat SBA pre-authorized. So it had at least been looked at by the underwriters to say that, we'll do this deal. So there was already an SBA lender in the picture, which expedited some of the discussions. The LOI, I don't remember the specifics at this time. I'll give you the deal structure, which was, it was a $8.5 million purchase. 20% seller financing, 10% injection by us through the ROBs. We maxed out the SBA 7A loan program with 5 million. And then there was about 20% of conventional lending added on top by the same lender to the SBA. So add all that up, we got about 1.2 million of working capital. Those numbers net out to zero.
Got it. And what did you like about the business? What were some of the things you liked or were concerned about while you were in diligence or even pre-diligence?
Yeah, so the big positives for the business were its growth trajectory and the industry tailwinds. So a lot of the business was based upon supporting data center construction. So here in this area, it's the most densely populated data center area in the world. They had done a lot of that work, and there was a lot more coming down the road. So the growth was highly dependent upon additional data center building. That's what I really liked. And there were opportunities to further diversify some of the revenue that was coming in. They had there were a couple different components to this business. About 60% of it was painting, and a majority of the remainder of that was industrial flooring. So the data centers need both of those, and the company was able to compete a little bit better than other businesses that didn't have both of those trades to offer under a single GC umbrella. A lot of our other competitors at the time began to add other trades to kind of copy the same formula. But the data center industry growth was a huge factor. So the valuation that we agreed to on the company, really for me, and what I had to convince the lender of, was based upon future potential more so than the historical numbers.
Got it. And I guess with that, what was like the DSCR on the business that at the time of purchasing, since you were sort of basing a lot of that value on future growth? I'm sure the lender's looking at historicals, so.
Yeah, so I'll give it to you in a different way. So the company was doing about $12 million in revenue, a little under, and the SDE was quoted at 2.5 million. So it was like a 3.4 multiple. And that was enough justification for pretty much everybody to take a hard look at the deal going forward.
And how did you, I guess, conduct diligence? What were some of the things you looked into? What were some of the things you wish you looked into? Hindsight 2020, but love to hear more about that too.
Yeah, so we didn't actually conduct a formal quality of earnings report. I had a couple of accountants that were helping me that I shared a lot of information with, had them look at things. Having another opportunity, I would have paid for a quality of earnings report. The things that we did diligence were much more on the legal side. I had met with the president. I didn't have the opportunity to meet much at all with the employees of the business at the time. The diligence was mostly face-to-face conversations with the sellers, discussions with the broker. I did as much legal background checking as I could on the sellers, the business itself, and the market, customers. We should have spent more time on the quality of earnings side of things with somebody who had probably more M&A experience on this scale of acquisition. Ultimately, we found a lot of things in the accounting post-acquisition that really caused us a lot of heartache. And some of those may have been found in a good Q of E. Some of those probably wouldn't have been found in a good Q of E. But a lot of that diligence was kind of self-organized by me, by farming it out to whomever I could find. I didn't have a
Uh,
great deal team in place when I started this. The network that I have now and the resources has grown pretty dramatically post acquisition, unfortunately.
yeah, that makes sense. I guess especially since it was your first time doing this, it's hard to imagine you would have had a strong sort of network or deal team behind you. But um, tell us more, about what happened post acquisition, I guess. What did it look like in your first 90 days? We didn't really touch on how you guys how the seller transitioned or what you guys negotiated for the seller transition, but kind of walk us through what happened in those first 30 to 90 days.
Yeah, the first 90 days was a shit show. The first 30 days was kind of the prelude to the shit show. Um, Leading up to the acquisition, the sellers weren't intimately involved with the business on a daily basis. So it was a husband and wife team. The husband had previously kind of been the operations person, but he had really removed himself from a lot of the day-to-day stuff, which sounds like a good thing, but in this case was not, because he didn't really understand what was going on in the business anymore, what the issues were, what needed to be fixed, corrected. The wife was handling the accounting department, and so she would come in about 1 day a week to make sure all of that stuff was taken care of. But there was an accounting staff, there was somebody doing AP, AR, and then there was another person kind of doing HR and payroll and conglomeration of other stuff. So I had enough foresight to hire a controller prior to the acquisition. And she ended up being a godsend. So she came in and was the one-for-one replacement for the wife of the seller's wife. So she was able to hit the ground running on day one and start absorbing information, transferring things over, and getting the lay of the land. We had a consulting agreement with both. The wife was like 30 days, I'm done, I don't want anymore. The husband was willing to stay on for like a year. So we had a consulting agreement, which was like limited time and kind of as needed. But I don't think I saw him after the acquisition in person more than probably half a dozen times. It
And why was that?
So once we got in, we realized that he wasn't that valuable. He thought he was valuable and he positioned himself that way, and he had some minor relationships in the industry, but for the most part, those relationships were being managed by the president of the company. So that was a positive for us because we didn't lose that continuity.
And there was a management team in place, it sounds like, or at least there was a president.
Yeah, there was a guy, and he was way overburdened with all of the stuff that basically the seller wasn't doing, didn't want to do, putting out all the fires that a business has, trying to develop business, and just manage this whole thing. So the business had about 40 employees, a whole bunch of subcontractors, and was doing like $12 million in revenue. So there's a lot to manage there from project management down.
And was that pretty consistent, or like they're all project based, right? So was it sort of growing? What was sort of like the history of the business?
Yeah, it was growing. It had grown from like 8 million to that 12 million in maybe a year or two. There was a pretty significant COVID bump. An element of the business was janitorial cleaning. It was actually where the business started initially, and it grew into doing these other things, flooring, and then they added paint at some point. So that janitorial component still existed, and during COVID, they profited quite significantly by cleaning a lot of these data centers, COVID cleaning. So they would go in and on a square foot basis, spray all these large facilities down, that are like 500,000 square feet in order to keep them operational. So there was a pretty significant revenue jump for that component of the business in COVID. And that never came back, right? We didn't expect it to, but that was a hurdle that we had to get through with the lender as well. So revenue had grown, but I was less concerned about the cleaning revenue and more interested in how does the construction business grow, because that's sustainable. And yes, it is project based, but there's the DC area has a pretty stable revenue stream based upon a large government presence. There were a ton of data centers here, so it wasn't like some other parts of the country where construction is cyclical, but it's a little bit less cyclical here than other places. So some of that risk is minimized, although it still exists.
I guess tell us about, you kind of mentioned that the first 30 days kind of was a prelude to the 90 days.
Yeah.
What did you kind of figure out,
So once we
I guess,
got
went
in,
wrong?
yeah, so the relationship with the seller deteriorated very quickly after the sale, starting on day one, where there was a mix up on when we were going to meet and actually make the announcement, the introduction. The seller had his wires crossed. I showed up on the right day. He wanted to know why I was there, so we had to schedule it for another time, and he flew off the handle. Pretty irrational, emotionally based person overall, and this was like the first clear
That's
snapshot I had to the way he reacted to either unforeseen events or things which he didn't agree with. So I put that aside and we got through the first day. And then
and did you see that coming at all, like during the negotiation phase, or
no, because we were both on our best behavior, we're courting each other. The sellers are being their best, I'm being my best. We're trying to sell each other on being the best person for this transaction. So, I mean, in hindsight, yeah, maybe there were some small things, but there weren't any glaring red flags that this guy couldn't keep his shit together, and he was going to fly off the handle every opportunity. So after acquisition, the relationship just went downhill dramatically. Probably the most transparent story is the sellers asked if they could come by the office one day to have a talk with me. This was probably a month after closing. And I said, yeah, sure, come on by. My wife was there. She was working in the business with me. And they sat down in my office and they said, we have a couple requests. One is we would like for you to fire this specific employee. And I said, okay, tell me why. And they told me that they had agreed to terminate this employee at the request of other employees prior to closing, but they couldn't do it because they didn't want to affect the closing process. And I said, okay, but I don't have any reason to terminate this employee, right? She's been great so far, and I can't in good conscience just terminate somebody because you want me to. This isn't your business anymore, right?
yeah.
So the next sentence out of the owner's mouth was, well, if you and I can't agree on things, we are not going to work together, and our relationship is going to drastically change. And then he went on to say, I want you to start copying me on every email so that I know what's going on around here. And it was a surreal experience because first of all, I had to bite my tongue, and I understood that they were going through a tremendous transition in life, right? We were going through a transition. The business was going through a transition. They were going through a transition. There's a lot of change going on, and everybody's dealing with it in their own way. So I'm trying to give them as much grace as humanly possible. But I came into that meeting just realizing they were totally fucking nuts. And they thought they were still in control of this business that they don't own anymore. And now I'm going to have to navigate not only trying to fix all the stuff that's going wrong with this business, now I've got this huge distraction of the sellers who do not appear supportive in any way. They're not going to make life easy for me. And unfortunately, I owe them money, and they also have some purse strings in the seller financing and some of the line of credit optionality that we had with the deal. So it went downhill from there. We learned a lot about the business once we got in the door, right? It was held together with bubble gum and duct tape. Everybody was overworked. There had been very little CapEx investment. The accounting and the books were just a horrendous mess. It took us a year to fix the accounting system. I mean, you name it, and the further, the deeper we dug, and the further back we looked, the more chaos we found, and just the integrity of data was not there. So we had very little confidence in any of the numbers, the data, the accounting prior to acquisition. We kind of started fresh and just said, well, we know what we got starting now going forward, and we're going to have to make sound decisions based on that. But this other data is totally worthless to us.
And is that just, and why do you think that was? Because it seemed like, they had an account, they had the wife who's the kind of the
Well,
accountant they had.
she's not a traditionally trained accountant. Not, she had experience running that business, but she didn't have any other accounting experience. So I think some of it is education, some of it's ignorance, but I do think there was some malice there as well in the way they managed the books to both portray a more profitable business than existed and leading up to a sale specifically. So, for example, there was our work in progress, the WIP. There were a bunch of jobs that were on that list. The gross profit margin, average gross profit margin blended for those jobs over time was supposed to be 39%. That was per the SIM and discussions, and that was the modeling. We based the modeling off of those numbers, right, to justify the lending and the cash flow. Once we got in, we started job costing and putting stuff in the right buckets and looking at what these things actually cost. We were closer to 30%. So that 9% is pretty drastic, especially when you're expected to make a $93,000 a month debt payment to a bank. So fortunately, we had 6 months stay before making those debt payments to the bank. But once they did, cash flow was really tight from day one.
And did the president, or were other employees kind of aware, or maybe the president, of the situation, or?
I think most people had their own assessment of who the sellers were. And that slowly came out over time as to their true character and what was important to them and how they had dealt with employees, how they had treated customers, those types of things. But there was the other small group of people that they had drank the Kool-Aid and they thought these people walked on water, and they didn't understand, or they weren't able to see the discrepancies and the issues and the flaws in what was going on. Unfortunately, some of those people worked in the accounting department, which didn't make things any better. And then on top of that, they had some allies that our two estimators were also pretty close to the sellers. So the two key elements for construction business, accounting and estimating, where all your data flows through, were untrustable based on the people that were working in those areas and the relationships they had with the seller. So we eventually had to part ways with all those people that still had close relationships because we couldn't trust them. They were bleeding information, that internal information to the sellers about what was going on. And that just made our job that much more difficult to try to start fresh and know what was going on internally, numbers wise.
And from your perspective, why did the sellers care? Is it because of the seller note they had in place that they wanted to make sure they were gonna get? Was it just emotionally they just weren't ready to sell the business? Or why do you think they cared so much? Were they, by the way, were they retiring, or why were they selling?
Yeah, the late 50s, they were retiring. Everybody asked that question. I can only give you my guess, which is the reactions and the decisions of the seller were based upon fear and ego. It was very difficult for the seller to face up to the fact that the business was growing without him, and that things were not as rosy as he led everyone to believe during his tenure. So decisions across the board going forward were totally driven by ego and fear. Huge narcissistic personality where everybody else is wrong. There shall be no challenging of the status quo. And a lot of people subscribe to that, unfortunately. He had this, he erroneously believed, without ever discussing it, that he was going to continue to have influence and make decisions within the business after the sale. So we never talked about that. There wasn't any consulting agreement. I would have never thought that was the case, but it was clear afterwards that he had that belief. And I'm not sure where that came from. It was probably there all along.
Got it. I guess let's fast forward a little. What happened after those, after you learned that, he's not going to be someone you could trust, and multiple people on the team were now people that you couldn't trust. What happened next?
Yeah, so we got to start moving the untrustworthy people out, including the sellers. Unfortunately, with the sellers, they had the seller's note. The seller's note was contingent upon meeting a 1.5 debt to service ratio. So we were not obligated to make payments on that note until we met that ratio. We'll get to that in a second. But in conjunction with the deal, there was also effectively a line of credit. The sellers agreed to keep all of the AR pre-closing in basically like an escrow account, a third-party account, and it was about $2 million of AR. And that was going to be our line of credit. We could draw upon that $2 million for the first year of the business as needed to make sure we had the cash flow to make payroll and pay all our bills, right? So shortly, we had $1.2 million of working capital to start with. That went pretty quickly. In construction, you're either creditor or a debtor. And in our case, we were both as a subcontractor. But our AR collection cycle when we bought the business was like 80 some days AR aging. And we're making payroll and we're paying our vendors 30 days or less. So there's a huge gap there of cash, and the working capital goes away super quick. So like a month in, we go through the working capital and we go to the sellers and we say, hey, we need to draw on this line of credit. And we give them the justification, we show them, they're like, oh, they reluctantly agree the first time. Another month down the road, we're in the same position. We don't have any cash left. All we're doing is paying our bills for the work that's been done. We're trying to collect AR, and we're working on chipping away that average AR down to 60 days, but it doesn't happen overnight. The second time around, the sellers say, we don't think you need the money. We don't believe you're running the business the way you should to preserve your working capital. So we're not going to authorize a transfer from that sweep account. We call it a sweep account, but line of credit, same thing. And they didn't have the authority to do that, but there was a co-signer for that account. It's supposed to be a third party who worked in the accounting department. That she was our AR person, and she was close with the sellers. So she wasn't going to do anything the sellers didn't agree with, is what it amounted to. So at that point, we had to make payroll, and we didn't have any money. So my wife and I had transferred, we had used $830K out of the 401K for the acquisition, for the equity injection. We had about $170K left in that account. And so we were forced a couple months into the business, 2 or 3 months, to withdraw all the remaining of our 401K in order to make payroll that month. And so after that, we go back to the drawing board with the sellers, trying to figure out how we're going to work through the use and authorization of this line of credit. And we both have our own points of view. We didn't have to draw on that line of credit anymore after that I remember, but the damage was already done. And that line of credit didn't end up being that useful to us. The whole time we're trying to also get an institutional line of credit. so that we don't have to depend on the seller.
And were you guys expecting the working, like the cash conversion cycle to be so long?
No,
Um,
it's something I didn't properly plan for prior to acquisition. And we had, even with the bank, we came up with that $1.2 million number and we thought we were going to be good. Also, we had $2 million of AR that we thought we could lean back on. We knew there was going to be some ripples over the first 6 months to a year, but without access to the $2 million line of credit, that's a whole lot harder to weather.
and were you successful in finding a line of credit from a bank or?
I think it took us about 8 months. We had to switch banks and we eventually found we were able to get a $500,000 line of credit.
Got it. So I guess the first, I don't know, 6 months, were you what was your focus? Was this sort of taking up all your time?
Oh yeah. So the issues with the seller and the cash flow was a huge distraction. I'm going to say it probably ended up taking 15 to 25% of my time when I'm trying to fix all the existing issues in this business. We're growing dramatically. There's issues with the health insurance. There's issues with almost everything across the board within the company, and they all require a lot of attention and energy to properly fix and attend to. So,
and just to be clear, the business was still growing this whole time.
Yeah. So in the first year, we had about 40 employees when we bought the business. We're doing about $12 million in revenue. At the end of the first year, we had about 80 employees. We were on track for doing over $18 million of revenue that year. We had moved to a new office facility that was larger. The tenant or the landlord at the previous office would not renew the lease. And it turned out that the sellers weren't paying the electric bill. They never started electricity at the previous office anyway, so we could never get our deposit back from them. So we grew into a new office pretty quickly. So, we moved. There were so many things going on in that first year. It was extreme. I don't think I never worked less than 60 hours a week. Probably had plenty of weeks that were 80 hours. A lot of weekend work. There was just so much to do, and we were kind of getting to the point at that first year where things were starting to just kind of taper off just a little bit and flatten out.
Then you mentioned, you were on track for 18 million in revenue. Did the EBITDA numbers that they kind of they tell you pre-close turn out to be real or?
Yeah. So the 2.5 million SDE does not turn out to be real. So the first that was 2021. In 2022, the EBITDA turned out to be less than $1 million. We actually netted $122,000 that year, the business. That's it.
Wow.
And so we had a lot of catching up to do. Some of that was gross profit, some of it was J curve, some of it was just erroneous data. So in 2023, we were doing great. We were growing. We were fixing a lot of stuff. And with the $18 million in revenue, we were going to do about $1.8 million in EBITDA for 2023, which was a pretty significant jump from where we were. We doubled pretty much everything. And then the debt service coverage was still going to be about 1.2, but we were pouring everything we could back into the business. We were recapitalizing, we were buying equipment, we were doing everything we needed to sustain that growth that hadn't been done in the years previous.
Got it. And I guess, what's sort of now where I guess we're 2 years down the road now. What's sort of the latest update?
Yeah, so the business totally shut down in September of 2023, last year. So I talked a little bit about the seller's note. It was $1.7 million of seller financing for the acquisition. In conjunction with that seller's note, the promissory note, there was what is called a confession of judgment clause. The confession of judgment is a legal instrument that literally says you've already confessed to this judgment of not paying this note. So it's like it's preloaded. So we already signed that, and I would never sign one again. But what it allows the note holder to do is to go to the courthouse without any purview from a judge. They give it to the clerk of the courthouse, and that clerk can then garnish any accounts to make good on that note. So going back to 2022, there's lawsuits start happening between the sellers and myself. There's issues with the closing documentation. There's issues with tax refunds. There's issues across the board. And so litigation starts to rack up. And at the 1-year net working capital true up, so June 2023, that line of credit was supposed to be returned to the seller. So that was $2 million of AR. It didn't turn out to be $2 million for a variety of reasons. But we have at that point in time, we have a list of issues or skeletons we found, including jobs that were underbid, the WIP I talked about, overbilling on the closing sheet, unapproved ticket work. There was an IRS audit. There were a ton of things that happened in that first year. We said, hey, we owe you, according to the net working capital, it's supposed to be $2 million. We're not paying you $2 million. We think it adds up to $850K. So we will pay you $850, and then we will let the court settle out the remaining $1.2 million delta for this net working capital true up. The sellers initially said, we don't agree with that. And then a couple weeks later, they made us a settlement offer. They said, we're willing to settle this and put everything behind us, which was great. They said, we'll give you an interest-only loan for the $1.2 million delta. And then at the end of I think it's 5 years, we'll forgive the note altogether. So when you did the math, it was like another $300,000 over the course of 5 years. And all this goes away. I said, done deal. Absolutely. Let's move forward. So we agreed to the deal. We sent it back to the lawyers. And then a couple weeks later, they rescind the offer. It said, we decided we don't want to do that. So that's July of 2023. Our vice president that runs our flooring division quit the day after that net working capital true-up check was given to the seller. I happened to be there on a Saturday. He showed up to drop off his keys and his computer, not thinking anybody was going to be there, and just left and started running his own business again that was doing the same shit we were, working with the previous owner of our business, the seller. So now there's non-compete and non-solicitation issues.
That's insane.
And now, so that's July.
And you guys did, there were non-competes in place, all of those.
Oh yeah, yeah. So all the contracts are great, but they got to be enforced, right? So that's a whole different conversation. Leading up to September, so the business shut down in September due to this confession of judgment. So all of this bad stuff happened between the sellers and myself. And rather than wait to collect their seller's note, their 1.7, or to finish up the bonded jobs on which they were still on the hook for, like they still had bonded jobs in their name, they had $1.7 million of seller financing, and there was still this $1.2 million of net working capital true up that was to be decided in the court. They elected to just go with the nuclear option. So they took that confession of judgment to the courthouse, and the clerk garnished all of the business accounts overnight. So all of our bank accounts, our line of credit, and all of our AR with all of our customers. So everybody received letters from the county saying, these accounts are garnished, you can't pay out anything. So we had $5 million of AR at that time. We had billed $3 million the month prior, and we had 80 employees, I don't know, 40 plus subcontractors, like 30 jobs in progress. And we had no way to pay anybody on anything, no vendors, nothing. So we were able to, that all happened on August 30th. We were able to run the business for 3 more weeks until we shut the doors and we told everybody to go home. We had no way to pay anybody. Everything was still garnished. You can't run a company without cash. We, along with one of our large GC customers, along with our bank, all submitted to the court request to stay this and like emergency injunction kind of deal to review this early so that the business could resume operations. Those were all refused by the court. And then the actual court date was October. I don't remember the exact date. And the judge ruled against us, despite a lot of proof that we weren't doing anything wrong. So this all came down to debt to service coverage ratio. And were we obligated to make those payments? In the spring, the bank had literally drafted a letter and sent it to the sellers, said the company has not met the debt to service coverage ratio. You cannot receive payments for your seller's note yet. There's literally a standby agreement with the SBA that says you can't accept or receive any payments. So they knew all that. But tactically, they just wanted to prove their point, which was you can't run this business the way I think you should. So I'm just going to go ahead and shut the whole thing down for you.
So after it was clear that maybe they weren't going to get their seller's note for a while, they decided to just, I guess, take the nuclear option then and there. And how have you been able to work this through with the bank since? It's been what, almost a year now since the business shut down. It must have been an incredibly emotional and trying time for both you and your family. And with the bank, I'm sure that's also a whole other conversation. But what sort of happened since? You had to sign a personal guarantee, obviously, when you took out the SBA loan. What's happened since?
So the bank was when this whole happened, I got a call on Friday evening from the bank about the garnishment. The bank was the first, from our checking account bank, right? The acquisition lender was the first call I made, an email I sent out. They were kind of ho-hum about it. They were not very participatory, nor were they involved that much. They were very inactive throughout the whole process. Once the business shut down, they were more interested in how they were going to collect the guarantee, their 75% guarantee from the SBA more than anything. They auctioned off all the assets of the business at the end of the year, which really wasn't that much. It's kind of chump change compared to the $6 or $7 million of debt that they had, or that I had with them. Yeah, they haven't been that supportive even to the point of, everybody agrees that what the seller did was wrong. I didn't have the funds to pursue them in litigation after the business shut down. And the bank wasn't interested in pursuing them to try to collect their debt either. I think everybody would have been served better if we could have collaborated and coordinated like a joint agreement to try to collect on the seller.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. Everybody was kind of interested in their own balance sheet, specifically the bank.
This is the acquisition lender.
Acquisition, yeah, lender.
And what were they, how did they, I guess, come after you then? They obviously had the SBA that was guaranteeing 75% of the loan. What happened sort of on your end?
Yeah, so we've got a personal guarantee. Our house, the acquisition lender had a second deed on our house. So we received a foreclosure notice in July of this year. They wanted to liquidate the house without any notification. I got that letter from the county in the mail, which was really nice. So since then, I'm trying to negotiate a way to purchase back that deed from them, so that we don't lose our house. But we're still on the hook for the remaining debt. It's personally guaranteed, right? So the business is no longer, but we still have the personal guarantee for the debt. So unless we can find some agreement or settlement with the bank, we will likely have to declare a personal bankruptcy in the not too distant future.
And since, I guess was it November or when the business shut down? Since
Yeah.
last year, what have you been focusing your time on? How have you been as paying the bills? It's a lot of money that this is costing you. So
Yeah, so I went back to consulting with my previous clients. My wife went back to her previous career. So we haven't had difficulty putting food on the table. We're able to maintain our bills on a monthly basis, but we have absolutely no way to begin to address, the negative $8 million of net worth that we have based on the liabilities. The business still has a lot of debt. In addition to the SBA debt, they still owe vendors tons of money. We still owe employees wages for the last 2 weeks. All that will probably eventually just go away whenever the whole entity folds up shop. But the biggest thing for us recently has just been trying to negotiate with the bank to figure out a way to retain our home.
and I guess, do you feel like that's promising now with how can everyone be helpful, I guess, who's listening?
It's going back and forth. It's been challenging. It's dragged on. I'm dealing with a lot of entities that don't move quickly: lawyers, banks, and the government. So none of them move quickly traditionally. So we've had an agreement with the bank for many weeks, but it's gone back and forth. The date keeps changing for which we need to provide funds. I've had funds, I haven't had funds. Basically, I got to borrow these funds to pay the bank, right? I don't have any additional money right now. We put everything in the business and we're paying our bills to put food on the table. But beyond that, it's not like we have any additional assets. All we really have is our home right now. In conjunction, yeah, so that's pretty time consuming. So I've had a normal job, so to speak, during the day, but I deal with a lot of this stuff. In addition, whether it's the creditors, the attorneys, emails, I mean, it's an hour to a couple hours a day, half of the weekend, just catching up on all the administrative stuff that's still happening with the business, trying to make sure people get paid, subcontractors, putting vendors in contact with the right people from GCs. There's still a lot going on, and I've tried to do all the right things that I have the power to do to make sure the situation is resolved as best it can be. But I only have so much influence in the situation, and ultimately I don't have any cash to pay anybody. So there's only so much I can do to resolve some of these issues over time.
And at this point, have you kind of come to terms with what's happened? Are you like, obviously you seem pretty steady right now, all things considered, but
Yeah, well, so I've had a whole year to process a lot of this stuff, even though it's ebbed and flowed, right? And we've had good days, we've had really bad days. It's still not great. We're very focused on what's going on tomorrow rather than what's already happened and that we can't fix. So we're fortunate. We're with what we have. We still have a house. We are healthy. We're able to come home every day and put food on the table. There are plenty of things to be grateful for. The business side of life is very unfortunate right now, but I'm still very motivated to get back into another acquisition at some point in the future. So I'm talking to a lot of people like yourself. My network has expanded dramatically over the last 6 months with people in the ETA space from all walks of life. I've connected with a lot of local searchers here in the area. And I'm trying to share as much information I can about my experience to help other people avoid the same mistake. So I'm still looking at deals kind of passively. I really need to put a nice bow on these liabilities that I have before I can jump into another ownership opportunity. But whether it's an operator, equity opportunity, or some hybrid in between, I'm very motivated to do that again in the future. And I continue to look at deals in the area, and none of them have come across as the perfect deal yet, but I'm confident that when it does, I'll be able to figure out a way to come up with some financing from some source and close it.
I mean, it's incredibly encouraging to hear that, even after going through what many would think is like a worst case scenario with, buying a business, that you still want to do this again. I guess looking back, is there anything that you could have done in hindsight that would have helped you, maybe pass on the deal earlier, or just
Yeah. I think there's pre-acquisition for sure. The rate at which we closed the deal was too fast. We were both motivated to close the deal, both the seller and myself. We were motivated to close the deal based on rising interest rates, first of all. I had a fixed rate 6 3/4 at the time, which looks like magic right now. And rates were creeping up. This was summer of 2022. And as that interest rate went up, the model changed, right? So we knew that at some point the model wasn't going to cash flow anymore on the debt. I think we were both willing to overlook indicators that this wasn't the best deal or scenario, because we kind of fell in love with the acquisition, both myself and the seller. They wanted out, I wanted in, and I was less concerned with what had happened historically and more focused on what we were going to do when we came into the business going forward to grow it. And I didn't expect or plan on the seller having the leverage or the motivation to undermine and sabotage our every effort to grow this business. And I don't know if anybody could plan on that, but even if I had spent more time with the seller, I don't know if I ever would have discovered those types of motivations prior to the acquisition. But we just ended up having very philosophically different ideas about how to run a business, how to treat people. Communication was a huge part of this. It was very challenging to communicate with the seller on a specific detail-oriented level, whether it be accounting or staffing or specifics about the company. And that inability or lack of willingness to dive into details about the business prior to acquisition, in hindsight, was an indicator for me that he either didn't know them or didn't want to talk about them. And I figured, well, we'll figure it out, right? So I certainly placed trust in inappropriate places prior to the acquisition. The confession of judgment is the big one, right? That's what sank the ship, but that's really an indicator of this whole thing. That ended up being a tactical instrument for the seller to utilize to shut down the business. And if I had never signed one, they would have never been able to do that. Those are the big things.
No, that's really helpful to kind of understand. I'm sure other people feel the same way. I guess just final question, what makes you want to dive back into this? After this entire experience, I'm sure many people will be like, I'm never touching acquisitions again. I'm never getting into business ownership. What makes you still, I guess, remain hopeful?
All of the same reasons I did this the first time are still valid. I want more influence into my career. I want opportunities to grow both personally, professionally, wealth-wise. I want to be in an organization that I can help grow. And there are limited opportunities to do that unless you have ownership in that thing. So those fundamentals all still apply to me. I didn't initially get into this for the wealth creation. It was always I want to be more involved, have more influence, more impact, more decision-making ability, and more control over the professional environment that I work in. And all that other stuff will come along. So those reasons are all still valid. I had a bad experience with this one. Bad things happen to good people. I've learned a tremendous amount in the last couple of years. And I would very much like to apply that to a new scenario in order to see how those experiences can be monetized and provide value in other ways.
That's no, that's incredibly insightful, Justin. I know we're over on time. This was I learned a lot from this. I'm sure other people feel the same way. Other people, I'm sure, are gonna feel both inspired, maybe. I don't even know what the feeling would be, but I think, this has been just, I guess, an insane and incredible journey. And I'm just happy to hear that, you're still hopeful and motivated to make to make your next one work. So I think that's probably, the most encouraging thing anyone can get out of this, right? Is bad things can happen to good people. You're completely right here. I guess final question is, if people want to reach out about your experience or just, maybe learn from you after listening to this podcast, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to find me. Willess. That's the easiest thing. I'm happy to communicate and share whatever I can. Like I said, my network's really grown pretty drastically over the last 6 months. I've met some incredible people. The community has been very supportive and very communicative. So the more we can share these types of things, I think it's better for everybody. Yeah. Whatever I can do to support others, I'm happy to do.
Thank you. And thank you for being so transparent and honest about your experience and your journey. And I'm excited to see what the future holds. You definitely have the right attitude. So excited to keep following along.
Resilience is key. You got to have it
Absolutely.
in business.
Thank you again, Justin. Thanks for your time, and let's please stay in touch.
My pleasure. You too. Thank you.